Well, hello and welcome back. We are on lesson 31, placing your trust and loyalty in love. So let's dive right in. Right away in the second paragraph that starts, therefore, it is with joy that I join with you, a few sentences down, he talks about your very self, which is unshakable, unchanging, unchangeable, and unchained forever. I love that. And he's also talking about this idea that he has so much desire for you that he trusts us, in a sense, completely, which I really, really, really love. A few paragraphs down, he talks about the paragraph that starts, if you identify with that level of perception, you can only conclude that you're separate. And what he's talking about is when we're using our egoic mind versus our Christ mind, that we are looking at things as if we're separate from them. You're separate from each other. You're separate from Mother Earth. You're separate from Yeshua. You're separate from God. And so it's just this idea, this false perception, if you will, of this idea that we're separate when in truth we're not. And that's kind of what he's getting at here. A few paragraphs down that starts with the soul, the level at which reality is far deeper than the level of the body can ever go anywhere. And then a sentence or two down, he says, the body mind, yes, can leave, but that is not what takes someone out of your heart. And this is really, really good, I think, for especially when we've lost people, we have lost loved ones, and we think, well, they're gone, they're separate. And this is really what he's addressing here, because he goes on to say it can only be your decision to withdraw love. So, in other words, nothing really changes in the relationship. It's just you are basically starting to withdraw love from this loved one who has gone on. It's only the withdrawing of love that creates separation in the experience of your awareness. In the following paragraph, so you're now sitting two levels removed from reality. First, you have become hoodwinked, thinking that the physical eyes show you what is true, right? Which the physical eyes to me is the egoic mind. Then you draw conclusions and create interpretation of the events the body's eyes show you. This creates the emotional effect that is like a soup that runs through you and around you and will remain so until it is healed. And then he talks about this concept, and I remember so clearly when I was into the Course in Miracles, the question, would you rather be right or happy? I think that's such a classic example, because I've seen people that are willing to die because they had to be right. It's more important for me to be right than it is happy. And it's like, which one do you want? You can't have both all the time. There are times when you have to make a decision. And I was one of those people, right? And all of a sudden I realized, well, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I just think about that in terms of modern day. Like, what's an example of that? Well, to me, modern day version of it would be politics. It's like when you look at politics, I often ask this question, is there any happiness there? Is there any happiness there? And my conclusion is I've yet to see any. And I don't care which side of the political arena you're on. It's just in terms of engaging with something, is it really important that no, it's this is the way to go. This is it. This is the only way to go. It's like, okay, you can have that as long as you may not be happy. And for me personally, it took a while before I realized, my happiness is more important than being right. Right. But to the ego, that's death. Just know that when you surrender to it and you say, I want to be happy versus being right, the ego is like, no, we have to be right. Then the following paragraph down, where it says, we have spoken often about the keys to the kingdom, which I think is this, I highlighted this a lot: desire, intention, allowance, and surrender. I love it. I love those four specific things: desire, intention, allowance, and surrender. And allowance, you go through a period of deep undoing. I've often said this: the first thing that we do is we unlearn, right? We unlearn, in which you disconnected the wiring that has led you to insist on the rightness of the interpretations that you've created and then linked to the events of the physical body mind has perceived. So we're unlearning, we're letting go, we're changing the wiring. In fact, in the following paragraph that starts, so as allowance is perfected, the last sentence says, the mind is unraveled. Again, to the ego, that is death, right? The following paragraph, now the perception of the body mind, of course, goes on, the last sentence. However, the mind that is healing does not identify that as the primary level of reality, right? The next paragraph, so as allowance surrenders the construct that has been made up in the mind and exists nowhere but in the mind, one rests in the unobstructed allowance of how the body mind goes through its days until it returns to dust. Again, horrifying for the ego. The last sentence in that paragraph, because there is no longer a need to identify with the interpretations. In other words, what happens is the Christ mind goes, no, this interpretation that I'm giving this thing is not exactly accurate. And there is no longer, quite happily, any need to be right. Any need to be right. As allowance comes to completion, something quite magical occurs. It is beyond all comprehension of the thinking mind. A few paragraphs down that starts with, anyone who is awakened knows exactly what this feels like. Anyone who's begun to awaken has touched on moments of perfect surrender. For in surrender, the mind beholds that all things that are arising and passing away are perfectly harmless. In other words, it has no impact on who and what you truly are, right? Nothing can impact you. You understand that. So as these things come up and they process and they go through, deep at the corner of your being, you're like, well, nothing is changing me. Nothing. They can hold no value because they abide in time. The next paragraph down, only a fool would create loyalty to that which is temporary, temporal, and ultimately unfulfilling. And down further, Yeshua says the statement, powerful statement, I value only God. And then the last paragraph of that section starts off with, doesn't start off with, but that paragraph starts off with, therefore, indeed, beloved friends, my trust to you is perfect, for I've come to only value God. In the last sentence, I abide in pure devotion only to what is truly real and perfectly unconditional, the presence of my mother, father, God, which is the same as the presence of love. Beautiful. In the next section, we start off, where have you placed your loyalty? And the second paragraph in a state of love, well, wait a minute, let me back up for a second. That first paragraph starts off with, indeed, then look well to see where you have chosen to be loyal to, what you've chosen to be loyal to. And if you've chosen to be loyal to something of the world, you have actually been using loyalty as a way to overcome fear. Think about it. I often said that what is not love is only fear. In a state of love, there is nothing, there's no clinging, there is no denial. So I think for me, the way I interpreted it, the way I tried to feel it is, what am I clinging to? What am I trying to hold on to? Right. And then further on down in the paragraph that starts, it's only an opportunity for you to be the one who loves in the midst of that context, simply for the sake of knowing love. And the sentence at the last sentence of that paragraph, but your delight is in loving and embracing and being in the field in which these events rise and fall. So in other words, we just sit back and we observe, and we don't get sucked into, or we don't cling to this thing needing to continue, or this thing needing to be a particular way or show up in a particular way. We can just show up and just observe, knowing that deep down inside nothing is changing. You aren't changing because of what's going on outside of yourself. Whereas before, you have an opinion, you judge, right or wrong, good or bad. We have a tendency to cling on to something, right? And then in the following paragraph, great question. If you are loyal to a person, place, or thing, look well to see, is there underneath a fear that you have not yet been honest about? Are you being loyal in order to have this person, place, or thing approve of you and stay with you so that you get something that you want? Oh, that's a hard one to look at, right? That's a hard one to look at, but it's a beautiful question. And then further on down, he asked the question. This is why I have often said, if you want to know truly what you idolize, what you're committed to, what you most deeply believe, merely look at where you are, who you are with, and what you are doing with your time and how you feel about it truthfully. So that's where you can kind of start looking at these things, right? Those that insist on saving up money for a rainy day are merely saying, I believe there can be a rainy day unless I do something to prevent it. Their trust has been placed in their power to manipulate and use the world to create what they perceive they must have. And so for me, when I read that, have I set aside money for a rainy day? Yes. Do I have savings for my retirement? Yes. So even when I read it, I need to look at this thing and go, yeah, okay. Like, how much are you doing that in fear, and how much of it is just being responsible, right? So that you have these things in the future, right? And so, even myself, I have to look at that and question that. And I would believe that most of us do, right? Next paragraph, and it is very, very different from the rest of the one awakened in God who knows that whatever arises and passes away in the field of space and time is inconsequential. So in other words, instead of being, consumed by, well, I've got to save money for retirement. I got to save money for retirement. I got to save money for retirement. This idea is like, look, no matter what shows up, I'm going to be fine because nothing is changing who and what I am. It's a whole different concept. It's a whole different way of showing up. It's a whole different way of being, if you will. And so that, therefore, it's this idea of having and acknowledging, like, hey, I'm going to be okay. I'm okay. No matter what shows up, I will be okay. Right. And then he goes on to say, to emphasize that point, he goes on to say, because that mind is so identified with being the presence of love that the body mind could contact cancer tomorrow and say, who cares? It's not going to touch me. It's not going to touch who and what I am. I really love this, the following part where he talks about suffering. This is why I suggest this simple thought. Suffering comes from being identified with form, whether it be a body, a belief, a career, or a context of experience of any kind. For all experiences comes and goes, liberation and deep peace come from being identified with the context. So then you're scratching your head going, well, what is the context? And he goes on to say, by context, we simply mean the matrix or the source out of which all possibilities are possible. So I love this. This is what Deepak Chopra talks about when he talks about being in the reality of infinite possibility, that each moment there's infinite possibilities. And then Yeshua goes on to discuss about it in terms of the idea of a musician who comes to appreciate the field of silence out of which notes can arise in a certain sequential order to create a beautiful medley. If it were not for the silence between the notes, no song could ever have touched your heart. So, in other words, learn to appreciate being in the moment of infinite possibilities, not being stuck to one particular way or one particular thought or one particular belief, but you're standing in the moment of infinite possibilities and going, what do I choose to decide in this moment? How do I want to show up? Do I want to show up in love or not? Right? And I love that. And then I love the last sentence of the final paragraph in that section. But the master artist knows that without the canvas, there is nothing, and therefore honors the blank canvas first. That's beautiful. The blank canvas is infinite possibilities. Think about it. You're looking at a blank canvas. Anything can go on that canvas. So it's standing in the moment of infinite possibilities and then being able to decide versus going and showing up with predetermined thoughts, ideas, beliefs, which are going to take us in a particular direction. When spirit shows up, it's infinite and say, hey, we might try something completely different here. So I love the idea of the blank canvas. In the next section, limiting beliefs naturally crumble as the soul awakens. And I just love this because it's everything that I talk about in almost anything that I do, in almost any experience. The second paragraph. So now what is actually occurring? You as an infinite being have merely realized that you have been hoodwinked. I laugh at that. And you are withdrawing value from what you placed your trust in. That feels like a crumbling. Again, the ego freaks out at this. And it's literally is a crumbling at the subtle level of energy that constructs a perpetual belief system about the nature of experience. Everything changes. And if you think about it, I always say this, you're going from using the egoic mind to understand something, using the Christ mind now. We're just switching operating systems is all that we're doing. And so he gives a few other examples in that section. Powerful. The next section is called Place Your Trust in the Love That Birthed You. When you become so much a lover of the wisdom of perfect union with God, so that is all that matters to you, you are already 90% free of the illusion. So in other words, when you are, that's all you want, is this union with God. That becomes the priority. Then you're 90% there, as the saying goes. In a couple of paragraphs down, it says, the paragraph that starts, "It is though your Father has created you as a powerful ocean in which you have been, knowingly or unknowingly, emanating all the waves that have become your particular experience of the soul. Trust the one that created you as an infinite source of awareness that is perfectly free in every moment to decide what experience you will have." So, in other words, instead of looking outside of yourself and letting that dictate what kind of an experience that you will have, you jump it. In other words, you switch it and you say, wait a minute, I'm going to have this kind of an experience no matter what happens. There's a huge difference. It's subtle, but it's huge. One, you're showing up and saying, no, this is what I'm going to have regardless of what happens. And the other one says, well, I'm going to wait and see what happens, and then that will determine my experience. Right? So there's a total difference with that. A couple of paragraphs down, it starts, "But if you look closely, you'll discover that your experience is a value you place upon the event. I know it seems subtle, but it's very, very important. Experience actually occurs nowhere but in the field of your mind." And then so he gives an example of somebody going and getting some ice cream, and then, realizing, oh, how did it go? And then the person says, well, to tell you the truth, I don't even remember what I had. So where does the experience occur? It does not occur at the level of the body mind itself. It occurs in the level of the mind. And in the following paragraph, he kind of goes on to discuss it even a little bit more. "An awakened being in the world simply delights and has fun from a state of clarity of knowing that whatever they choose to do with the body mind is merely a free choice based on what they are choosing to value in the moment." That's what they're choosing to value. And if they own that valuation, they can totally enjoy the experience they are having. Right? The next paragraph, the very last part of it, the paragraph that starts, "Then they have come full circle." And at the very end, it says, "Regardless of what the body mind is actually doing." So, in other words, it just doesn't matter what you're doing with your body. It doesn't matter, because you can choose to have a great day. You can choose to have a good experience. You can choose that no matter what happens, I'm going to be happy today. You can do those things, right? And then the paragraph a few down that starts, "There's no difference between that and driving a truck to New York City." So he's talking about the difference between him doing all the miracles that he did, feeding the 5,000, talking to people in Israel, and that. And then at the very end of that paragraph, um, he talks about, "If the mind within the soul is taking complete ownership and delighting in the mystery of creating experience and choosing to bring enjoyment and freedom to that moment, regardless of what that moment may look like, we can still choose for it to be magical," for example. Next paragraph. "And that is why the events of the world can never bind you. All suffering comes because of the interpretation you are overlaying over the events." So, in other words, you're the one that's causing it. That it's coming from you. It's coming from you, right? And then he brings up his crucifixion in the paragraph below that. "Was my final learning lesson a realization I had broken the spell. I was no longer under the spell of the egoic mind or the body mind. I merely looked upon my experience and decided to freely be in a state of love. And in the midst of that context, even though he was getting crucified, he still chose to be in a state of love." And he goes on to say, "You're free to be in a state of love in the midst of any context, as you watch, observe, and waves temporary come and go. As you see that happen, as you develop the capacity within yourself through these choices for love, through the choice of forgiveness, through the choices to be happy instead of right, to live in innocence and wonder instead of certainty and dread, and to rest in true knowledge, true knowing, rather than the relative knowledge of the world, you come to see that all that is arising and passing can never leave you, ever." I think that's a really powerful paragraph. I highlighted it and wrote down, "You are free when." So you are free when you choose, no matter what, you choose love, you choose forgiveness, you choose to be happy instead of right. You live in innocence and wonder instead of certainty and dread. You just allow things to be as they are, right? And then he continues to go on to say that nothing dies. "Through a beloved friend passes away in what you call death because you don't identify your friend with the body mind. And because you do not, then you perceive that you can no longer love your friend. You just enjoyed loving your friend. And then you also understand that nothing dies." It just moved on to somewhere else. You can still love that person. Nothing dies, right? And then a little comment that he makes, only love is real. And in love, all things exist forever. I'm not separate. I'm not lost. I'm not free. And then the very last paragraph of that section. The enlightened sage is merely one who has cultivated the practice of training the mind to choose the reality of love under all circumstances. In other words, it doesn't differentiate. It just chooses love no matter what. I'm going to choose love. 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 Right? The next section is what will you choose to value? And really, it's just making one point in this section, and that happens within the first paragraph. Be you, therefore, loyal to love. Be you, therefore, loyal to your perfect union with God. Like, if you're going to have two values, those would be two really good ones to have. I'm loyal to love. That's my value. I'm loyal to God. That's my value. That is what I value. A few paragraphs down, here then, beloved friends, is a pure essence of loyalty and trust. If your loyalty is in anything that can crumble, you have merely not yet chosen to place your loyalty in that which cannot crumble. Right? Beautiful. Beautiful. I love this in the paragraph that starts, see then the protection of all events. And that it says, they are already held in the arms of the perfect loving God, and each event truly serves no purpose save to nudge that soul, that spark of pure awareness or intelligence, to look deeper beyond the illusion. Look deeper, look deeper, look deeper, look deeper. In the last paragraph, it just talks about this idea. Look and see where you are with trust and loyalty in your own life. Simply ask yourself, where are my idols? What am I attached to and why? Right? And then so just a couple of little thoughts to stir the pot, right? To have you look at some things that you might not normally want to look at. The next section is called When You Choose Love, You Become Free. And again, there's a lot of things where he's talking about, reemphasizes this idea of where love and where love is not. And I really love further down in that section, there's a paragraph that starts, since what you want is love, practicing teaching only love. Teaching love is not talking about love, not about philosophy of love, not about the metaphysics of love. You teach love by being love in each moment. You just simply be, right? And you can only be loving by allowing yourself to feel the presence of love in and as your moment to moment experience. So you're constantly going back. I'm choosing love. I'm choosing love. I'm choosing love. I'm choosing love. In the next paragraph that says, because love is unconditional, you are free now. The last sentence in that paragraph, this is the same thing as saying that God is given to you by grace in each moment, and you are asked only to open and receive. That's it. Open and receive. You're not doing anything other than opening and receiving love. And the rest of that section is just, again, more reemphasize the same points. And in the very last section, it says, review where you've placed your loyalty. And there's a lot of nudging, if you will, to start taking a look at those areas where you may be placing loyalty in something you might want to think about changing. Look well then, beloved friends, over the next 30 days. Enjoy merely looking at where you've placed your loyalty in the past and where you're placing it now. And again, we're doing that without shame, blame, judgment, or guilt. None of that. Right? Look at your grand journey that you have made. Think not then that you have been apart from the one. And again, there's just more comments about that that he makes, which are just nudgings or ways to remind you, hey, what do I need to look at? Allow then everything else to crumble. Give then perfect freedom to all created things, for they belong not to you. For the Christ who walks this earth knows that his or her primary purpose is to bless all creations, right? Seek to possess nothing or no one. Seek to change nothing and no one. Seek only to love. See then, so then, as you conclude this lesson, simply make the decision to spend 5 minutes doing nothing but loving all that you see through the body's eyes, and that you notice arising in the mind as a memory or an image of a friend or what have you, or an event, any event that has occurred. Simply decide to love it. That is all. That concludes our lesson. We are going to next week be talking about lesson 32, the longing of the soul. is to know love. I hope you have a great day. God bless, and we'll see you next week. Okay? Take care.